All right, so I'll be reading a verse from Mark chapter 20, or verses 20 through 22. Mark 15, verse 20 through 22. When they had mocked him, speaking of Jesus, they took off the robe and put on they took the purple robe off and they put his own clothes back on him. And then they led him up to the crucifixion area. And one man from the city of Cyrene named Simon was the father of two boys, Alexander and Rufus. Simon was walking from his home, and the soldier forced him to take up the cross of Jesus and carry it. As the soldiers brought Jesus up to the place that is known as Golgotha, which means place of the skull. Okay, those verses are pretty amazing. And let me go into them a little more deeply. First, I want to talk about two words that we're going to be using quite a bit. The first one is kind of fun, and the second one is hero, right? Y'all know what a hero is. So people sometimes use hero, but when you see that word, people typically think of someone male. So a lot of times people are talking about why we started using that word. And now people have kind of put a little juice on it, and now they call it a shero. Like if you're talking about a male, they'll go ahead and use the word hero, but in today's culture, they've kind of morphed it into a female version called shero. And that's kind of cool because when you hear something like hero, you immediately think of the pronoun for man. And so I will be using shero sometimes through this sermon, and you'll see why it'll be apparent. But you know, for so long, we have read and heard so many stories about heroes and sheroes. People in the medical world, you know, our doctors, our nurses, our emergency EMS folks. We read so much about them who have just been distributing food into high-risk areas, going above and beyond, helping their neighbors throughout this pandemic. We've seen lots of amazing stories about wonderful people, and they have put themselves at risk. And I really think they are authentic heroes and sheroes, and there are so many of them out there. What this shows is so many people know how to show the Shema of God. And that Shema means to love God and love others. And through this pandemic, we see such concrete evidence of people putting into action their love for each other. Now, in John chapter 15, verse 12 through 13, it reads, this is Jesus speaking, "My command is to love one another as I do love you. There is no greater love than this, than someone who will give up their lives for their friend." And that's awesome. You know, as we delve into our discussion of heroes and sheroes, they risk their lives for families, for friends, most definitely. But they also risk their lives for strangers, for people they don't know at all. They go ahead and move into those dangerous places and risk their own safety to assist those folks. And there are millions of stories like that worldwide about people who ran into burning buildings to bring people out to safety and save their lives. There's a story about a guy who ran into someone and brought them out. And this person did not die because of that valiant action. You know, often you'll hear stories of people driving and seeing horrible accidents where cars are aflame and they will run and pull people out of the wreckage in order to preserve their lives. Some people see animals in danger and they will climb up the tallest tree to help bring a cat or whatever that's stuck in the tree and bring it down. Now, those people are amazing and wonderful heroes and sheroes. Now, when I was growing up, my parents didn't really sign stories about Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I didn't grow up with those tales. My parents told me stories about what had happened at the school for the deaf. I remember sitting around in a circle with my mom and my dad, and they'd be telling us stories. And some of the stories were sad because they were stories of abuse. But so many of the stories were absolutely beautiful and sweet, sweet stories. Now, there was one story about my dad and his shero. When my father was a young boy, he had to escape from his home and go to school because his parents did not speak English at all, and they had not learned any sign language. They were very, very poor. And so my dad and all the kids had to quit school when they reached 6th grade and work on the farm. Now, my dad was a 7th grader, or entering 7th grade, and he was the baby of the family. And he was the 7th kid in this family. That was an interpreter error. He was the 7th child in the family. And my father had an elder brother who was hard of hearing, as I am. Now, my dad is deaf. And he went to Iowa School for the Deaf, as did another deaf brother. Now, my dad and my uncle did not start school until my dad was 8 and my uncle was 10. And they found out because the state of Iowa discovered them and mandated that my grandparents send them to school. And they both just loved school so very much. It didn't matter that they had grown up in an oral environment and that they had experienced abuse, and that the school was oral and had abuse. But they would run away from home so that they could make it to school. And if you were driving from the family farm to the school for the deaf, that is a 6-hour drive. And sometimes my deaf uncle would sneak up to the farm, meet my dad, and then drive him to school. There are other times that my dad actually walked from the farm to the school for the deaf. And my dad had a story one time about one time when he had to walk to school and he didn't have any shoes. So he had to walk that far with no shoes. That is absolutely how much he loved his school. Anyway, my dad had a shero there. This was a deaf lady who lived on the ISD campus. Gary and Barb might remember this, actually. Whoever's from Iowa might know, Robin might know too, but there was a tiny, tiny little cottage on the campus that they refused to sell. You know, when the state of Iowa purchased the property, there was a poor family who was living in this tiny cottage, and so they let them stay. And this was a family of deaf people that had children and they were so incredibly poor. This was the 1930s and the 1940s. So they were destitute. And to play sports, you had to get to school early, but the dormitories were not opened yet. So my dad would leave home and he wouldn't have any place to eat or sleep. And that deaf woman, even in her poverty, welcomed him in to stay with them. And she took him in every single year. And that woman, my dad would say, even in her poverty, she would take whatever she had, whatever roast or type of meat she had, and parcel it out so that everyone had an even portion, including my dad. She gave my dad a place to sleep as well. My dad can tell that story a lot better than I can. Because when my dad signs, you can see the love that he has and the gratitude that he has for that woman. Her name was Marty. And this woman shared her love. She shared absolutely everything that she had, no matter how poor she was, so that my dad could go to school. She was my dad's Shero, and she's my Shero as well. And I was able to meet her several times many years ago. And her heart is huge and beautiful and sweet. I am so very, very thankful that I was able to meet her and hear her stories and just be able to take her in. She was an amazingly beautiful woman. Now, did you notice that when we talk about heroes and sheroes, we tend to ask people, what made you do that? What made you willing to be so kind and take these actions? And when we ask them, the people say, well, everybody would do the same thing, right? Isn't that what they always say? But you know what? That's really not true. Is everyone willing to run into a burning building that's aflame to rescue someone? No. Will anyone be willing to go into a burning car and extract somebody? No. If you're on the highway, that's really dangerous. Will anyone be willing to take care of people stricken with the coronavirus when you know that you can die from that virus? Absolutely not. No. Will anyone just welcome someone into their house and feed them even when the person is poor and say, come on and you can stay here, even though you know that they've got children of their own to take care of? No. So what is it that makes people show so very great love? What makes people want to sacrifice like that for a stranger or for anyone for that matter? Who does that and why do they do it? Now, what's really cool, and I hope this story this morning helps all of us understand this character a little bit, this characterization a little better. You know, the story of Jesus is he's on the way to crucifixion. He's being led to the crucifixion. Jesus has been apprehended, he's been flogged, he's been beaten, he's been jailed, he's gone through all of that. But in this story, they focus a lot on the people who are around Jesus more than on Jesus himself. And I thought that was very interesting. So it seems like Jesus was pretty quiet, that he willingly endured arrest, imprisonment, abuse, flogging, judgment, and being led to his demise. Now, those folks who are with Jesus this week are spotlighted, just like you and I can spotlight. We spotlighted Cindy when she was singing, and I'm spotlighted now. So this Bible really spotlights It's other folks that are in Jesus's story rather than Jesus. Now, this guy, Simon, that we read about this morning, he was with Jesus during this absolutely life-changing event, and we do not know very much about him at all, right? We don't know much about Simon. But Simon is significant because he's mentioned in the Bible. Jesus had so many followers during his ministry. And during the last days, during that last week, I think it's really important that the Bible chose to mention Simon. Now, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 and through 26, it says, this is Jesus speaking again, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life must lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. What profit is it to a man to have the whole world and lose their soul? What can anyone trade for their soul? There is nothing as precious." And I think that as we all learn more about risk, we all learn more about risk when we pick up our crosses and do something about the problems that are in the world. That is our learning experience, right? I believe that we grow and learn, and that Jesus's story has much more to be uncovered. There's much more there than we thought. There's more meat, so to speak, than is on the surface. Yes, Jesus was pretty passive that week. He just accepted what was happening, and then he endured crucifixion. But Jesus was not quiet about his demands for equality, for love, for mercy to be shown throughout the world. And Simon, who was from Cyrene, truly did pick up Jesus's cross and carried it for Jesus, for our Messiah. That very same cross on which Jesus was crucified. So I want you to picture this. Simon was from Cyrene, and that city was a big city. It was a major city in North Africa. There were lots of Jewish people who lived there. And then Israel. Oh, wait, I've lost my map in my brain. Hold on. Where was Israel and where was Egypt? I think, yeah, Egypt was to the side, and then Israel was south of North Africa. So anyway, the Bible emphasizes that Simon was chosen to carry Jesus's cross, and he was not from Israel. So Simon is a hero in this story, and he was an immigrant. He maybe didn't even know about Jesus. You know, he had been traveling from North Africa, probably on foot. The soldiers saw him and just ordered him to come and pick up this cross and carry it. He may not have known who Jesus was. And that was very uncommon for a Bible to mention people or to mention children's names. And they even mentioned that Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. So maybe Mark wrote down the names because by the time Mark was actually writing this, which was much later after Jesus's death and resurrection, they were talking about Simon was carrying the cross and he had two boys and they were Alexander and Rufus. So maybe he just wanted to make note of it. but it seems as if people in the area knew who Simon and his sons were. And also in the book of Romans, chapter 16, verse 13, it's written, please greet Rufus. He is the chosen of the Lord, and please greet his mother. His mother has been as a mother to me. And Paul wrote that 20 years after Jesus' death. Paul wrote about a Christian named Rufus and his mother who was still living. So it's possible that his father was Simon from Cyrene. Plus, the gardener, the archaeologist, excuse me, not gardener. This is Debbie sign for archaeologists. Okay, so the archaeologists in the first century were excavating the grave sites and the tombs east of Jerusalem. And as they were excavating in that area, they found a Jew from Cyrene entombed there. And there were lots of Jews from Cyrene who were buried in that same area. Anyway, the archaeologists found one tomb with a plaque that was inscribed, Alexander, son of Simon. How cool is that? So Simon and Alexander were popular names for sure. So we don't know with certainty that those were the same people. We're really not certain about that, but it seems like it's possible. Because Simon, who could have been ordered to carry the cross of Jesus, had quite an influence on his sons, Alexander and Rufus. I mean, they probably saw Jesus crucified. They probably saw the temple curtain torn. I mean, they probably witnessed all that, and that profoundly affected their lives. And that's just beautiful. And if you remember from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that if someone asks you to walk 1 mile with them, then go ahead and walk farther if they ask you to, right? That's kind of the gist of Jesus's teaching. And in the Roman law would say that the soldiers had the right to order anyone to carry their burdens. And so that day, a lot of people don't really realize that what was being carried was that the uprights for the cross were already there. So there were 3 uprights. And so what the soldiers were making people carry were the crossbars, were the beams that went across the uprights, because the uprights were already standing. Because there's no way that you can humanly carry an entire cross. They were incredibly heavy. And the beam also was heavy. So that crossbar was very heavy too. So the 3 pillars were already there, the verticals. And then when it was time for Jesus to be led, he was unable to carry the crossbar because he'd been flogged and beaten and was just so emaciated. He tried to carry it and kept falling. So finally the soldiers spied Simon and said, hey, you get over here and carry this. And he probably had the 2 boys with him, so they walked along and were carrying it all the way up to Golgotha. You know, Golgotha's up on the top of a hill. And so you have to carry it up a pretty steep incline, and that's hard to do. I didn't walk on that hill myself when I was in Israel, but I did see it. It was pretty cool to look at it through binoculars and all. And it truly does look like a skull. You can see the outlines of the eyes and the rest of the skull there. So anyway, Simon was carrying the beam because Jesus was too weak to do it. And then that's all we know. That's all we know about Simon. That's his whole story as far as what we know. But for so many times, the story, someone's mentioned in a story and it's really significant, but we don't hear any more important details, right? There are some things that are just unsaid, and sometimes those things are more important than things that are said overtly. But you know, Jewish custom is that in Jewish custom, heroes are celebrated. And so he would have been celebrated because he was strong enough to carry this beam. And so that story has been handed down from generation to generation. And Jewish people to this day still carry the stories and celebrate their heroes. But they don't, but you know, Simon wasn't Jewish, so there aren't any epic stories about him. Well, actually, Simon was Jewish, excuse me. But they did not write an epic story about him and pass his story on for generations. But that week when Jesus was arrested and beaten and flogged, the Jews did not carry this story through history and talk about the flogging. And same with Simon. They did not glorify Simon and carry his stories down through the ages. Unlike today. You know, people, they just did not celebrate that. So I think this is kind of fascinating. This is a study that was done. A scientist was studying about what is it that makes people so quick to help? What is it that makes people want to do that? And one scientific study found that people who jump to aid do that because they don't have a lot of empathy. People who have a lot of empathy and see emergencies just take too long to respond. People who have less empathy just see the emergency and jump right in to help. I thought that was kind of interesting. That was the findings of one study. So when we hear or see the word hero or shero, we automatically think that that's an individual who has a lot of empathy, a lot of love, a lot of kindness, a lot of courage, and is willing to risk their lives, that they're willing to jump into danger to help. However, this study says that that is not the case, that those are folks who have less empathy. And if they see an emergency, they see it's an emergency, and so they know it needs to be responded to, and they just do it. But that was one study. And heroes and sheroes, they went on to say, are someone who do something extraordinary in emergency situations. They are people who demonstrate bravery. They come in and save the day. They can be pretty dramatic. They love to overact. And a lot of times we deem those people heroes. But that's a really terrible definition of a hero or a shero, I think. That's a Hollywood depiction. That's a TV definition, right? Because really what God, I think, is trying to teach us is that heroes and sheroes are those who act and do whatever they can. The story of Simon of Cyrene, who was just walking along, minding his own business, when the soldier ordered him to come and help carry this beam, didn't have a choice. And so he was not glorified. You know, the verses don't glorify him. They don't say, wow, you carried that cross for Jesus. That was great of you. And they don't tell that story over and over. They didn't give him an award for him. He didn't make the news. They didn't have a newspaper article about him. There were no magazines interviewing him, highlighting what Simon had done and that Simon was the one who carried Jesus' cross. Wow, that didn't happen at all. So God wants us to look at Simon and understand that we also will be carrying our cross whenever we need to do it. And even if our kids are watching us or worrying about us, we too will have a cross to carry. And it may be someone else's cross that we will be responsible to carry. So what I'm saying is real heroes and real sheroes are people who are motivated by something and then they go and carry it out and do it. So what are you passionate about? What is it that you want to convince the world to join with you on? What world problem do you want to solve? You don't have to wait for an emergency. You don't have to have a special ability. You don't have to have money. You don't have to have a college degree. You just have to do something. Our world will feel hopeless if everyone just sits around and does nothing. But we can choose to exhibit hope, and we can do that by jumping into action, by picking up a cross and making a difference. If we take action, then we too will be called heroes and sheroes. So think for a moment. What is it that you see out there? What is it that you see around you? What is it that you want to make different? Possibly it's a charity. Maybe it's in the political realm. Maybe it's in the environmental movement. Maybe it has to do with social justice and equity. Maybe it has to do with immigration or mental health. Maybe physical health. What is it that you see out there that you want to make different? A hero and a shero is not what Hollywood makes us think they are. Heroes and sheroes are people like that deaf lady, like Marty, in Council Bluffs, Iowa, during the early 1940s, who welcomed a runaway, fed him, and provided him a place to sleep. She carried his cross. She carried the cross for my dad. And what can we do? Amen. Let's pray.